here with Michael, Bernhard, and Jeffrey Kopstein.
Yes, yes.
From the University of Florida and the University of California, respectively. You were both here presenting on the panel on on concepts of citizenship and nationality. Your paper at this conference was the long-term implications of Leninist nationality policy on post-communist development. But since I was at your panel, I know that this also forms part of a larger project, a book that you're both writing. So could you both tell us more about both the presentation here, but also the conception behind your book?
Sure. So our book is an attempt to bring the long-term political development of Eastern Europe into kind of the meta-narrative of European development that's been written about in the school of comparative historical analysis. And essentially we're looking at what the long-term unexpected effects of Leninist patterns of development are. And we look at several areas that are important for modernity, and particularly nation building, state building, socioeconomic development, and then we try and talk about the impacts that that's had on post-communist political development. That kind of sums up the book in a thumbnail sketch. In your paper, you talked a lot about the continuities from the communist period and the nationality policy, and then the post-communist period, and how this often kind of pushed these projects of nation formation that were often quite violent, no? Could you elaborate more on that?
Well, as Michael said, the book is broadly about these kind of long-term unintended consequences, the Leninist legacies. And you know, communists and Leninists, they originally didn't want to deal with nationality questions. But they found themselves forced to because the world was organized along the line of nation states. And so before they took power, they used the nationality question instrumentally for revolutionary purposes. But after they came to power, of course, they had to deal with the fact that the places where they were building states were in many places multi-ethnic. And in the paper, what we talk about is the long-term implications of that. They either tried to align nation and state quite violently. They moved around people, they killed a lot of people, they tried to make borders and nations align. And then ironically, in places where there was kind of little sense of nationality, say in Central Asia, they actually went about making nations and having with academies of sciences and language academies and linguistic standardization. In Eastern Europe, where nationalities already existed, and the people largely lived mixed with each other. So, you know, not just Czechs and Slovaks, but of course Germans, Jews, Hungarians and Romanians. They went about trying to simplify the environment using quite standard tools that regimes had used before, but of course with much less restraint because they felt less restrained because they were revolutionary parties. And the implication of that had very long-term implications for after communism.
Precisely the implications after communism, you even had some data in terms of the electoral politics that this led to when the Eastern European states started separating from the Soviet Union, no? And this also had implications in terms of who people voted for. Can you tell us about your conclusions in regards to these implications?
So should I deal with that? Well, if you look at, just very quickly, before communism, the main electoral cleavage in all of these societies, much more important than class, right? And much more, I mean, distributional politics were all about ethnicity. Who got to control the state, who got the cool jobs, where were taxes going to be high and where were taxes going to be low. Those were all dictated by the ethnic divides. And if you look at the electoral map of Czechoslovakia before World War II, if you look at the electoral map of Poland before World War II, and even Hungary, which of course was much smaller in the interwar period and still is today, with very few ethnic minorities, there was still kind of a heavy ethnic divide. And the implications, of course, is, when the Nazis came to power, they went about nation simplifying with a great brutality, and the communists continued that policy or reaffirmed it. And so if you look at the electoral map today of Eastern Europe, ethnicity is really not the most important factor anymore. And it's largely driven, it's sometimes there, but it's driven by other factors too. And so the long-term implications of this, it's not that they're not giant political problems in the region, but to the extent that ethnicity is once again a factor, it's largely driven by the new migrations, not by pre-existing ethnic pluralism, which had always been a gigantic problem before.
Except for a few places like Macedonia or Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Absolutely, and where ethnic pluralism remains, the politics of ethnicity of the interwar period are largely being recapitulated today, kind of replicated, and of course on a different global scale with different global constraints, but they continue to exist.
And your book is coming out soon, or?
Simply has to be written.
It's about 50% written.
Very good.
Yes.
Well, we wish you the best of luck and looking forward to read it. And thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks for a great conference.
Thanks for having us. Yes.